I think the Fed is out of control. I think what they're doing is wrong.
The Fed is controlling your money in all of your accounts, and if you ever want to understand how, settle in because you need to watch this video. You're often both earning interest and paying interest. Yes, the Fed controls both the rate you earn and pay. And understand that when we have high interest rates, there's a strong economy. Low interest rates occur in a weak economy. Don't you like easy ways to remember important stuff like that? We all do. Let's see what's behind this and why do rates change? Also, how weird your world will get with negative interest rates and how Donald Trump got involved with all this. Here, the Fed's leader, Chairman Jerome Powell, is clearly trying to catch a basketball. Really though, more on what he does too and why you should care. Hi, I'm Keith Weinhold, Get Rich Education founder, Forbes Real Estate Council member, best-selling author, and longtime real estate investor. The Fed's plan to muzzle biting inflation, that's gone about as well as your New Year's resolution to stop cursing. All right, well, what's that really mean even? Well, a few years back, you can see that the Fed raised their federal funds rate hard and fast, and other interest rates are based off of this. And follow me here because you can understand this. Rates were raised because the economy had been hot, when seemingly everyone that wants a job is employed at, say, Apple or Chipotle. Well, okay, then those companies, they have to compete to attract scarce workers by raising their wages. To pay higher wages at Apple and Chipotle, those companies then have to raise their prices on what they sell, which, yep, heats up inflation. So that's why the Fed raises rates to keep the economy from overheating and helping to rein in inflation, which had its cyclical peak of over 9% back in 2022. Now, how exactly do higher rates slow inflation? Well, that means that people feel more like saving than they do borrowing and spending. Because see, if rates go up high, like 15%, how motivated would you be to borrow and start a business or get a mortgage for a property? Well, not very. In fact, you'd be more likely to save your money if you could get that 15% interest in a savings account. All right, so what this does is it slows the flow of money. More people park it. And when you save rather than spend, you don't bid up prices for consumer items, and when you don't bid up prices, prices stop rising, and this is simply why higher rates slow inflation. And conversely, I'll help you understand the effect of lower interest rates soon. But first, what's wrong exactly with high inflation anyway? Why would the Fed fight that? If prices go up 10%, but so do your wages, well then what's the problem? Well, high inflation is bad because that makes consumers lose faith in the currency, and high inflation also means variable inflation, and then it gets hard for people to plan when you have no idea what a dollar will be worth in a year. And high inflation also ruins savers' purchasing power, especially retirees. And the Fed targets 2% inflation. That's their idea of stable prices. Now, why would the Fed lower rates? Well, because persistent high rates can induce a recession because they slow the economy, like I described earlier. Lower rates spur, though, the opposite environment. When times are slow and there's not much spending and not much economic activity, low rates encourage borrowing at that low rate, and therefore people have more to spend. That fires up the economy, and too much of it stokes inflation again. See, imagine if an interest rate was just 1%. Well, you might like to borrow and spend a lot at that rate, and you sure wouldn't want to save much to get a paltry 1% yield. That behavior activates a slow economy, and now you can see why, if we enter a recession, lowering rates is one of the best tools that the Fed has to bail us out. Before we go on, in helping you demystify this and really get clear, to understand some of the lingo that the media uses, When the Fed is hawkish, that means that they're raising rates to cool hot inflation. When they're dovish, another term the media uses, that means there's no aggressive action. They're not changing rates, they might even be easing them. Calm and dovish. Now, interest rates at zero, they are extreme conditions and really introduce distortions in an economy, and this was once considered avant-garde and extreme, a Fed funds rate of zero, but that prevailed from 2009 to 2015 to pull us out of the global financial crisis, and that was a generational first time for doing that, but yet we relied on zero rates already again from 2020 to 2022 to pull us out of COVID. Sheesh, what happens during future crises? Negative interest rate policy or NERP? Now, it's unlikely that we would adopt that, but other advanced nations have tried NERP. Japan, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland. Consider this wacky world. With NERP, your savings account interest rate of, say, minus 2%, that would mean that for every $1,000 you have parked at the bank, you would have to pay the bank $20 a year, plus the bank would have the benefit of using your money. And what about mortgages? Negative mortgage rates, that would mean you'd pay zero mortgage interest, and the bank would pay a borrower like you for taking the loan from them. And this still seems like an unlikely scenario, but with negative rates, oh, you try to be borrowing all over the place. NERP encourages you to save nothing and borrow everything, and where it's been tried, it's often had adverse side effects. Now, overall, think about these interest rate movements as a tug of war between inflation and a recession. The Fed doesn't want either side to win the tug of war, so they're trying to maintain a Goldilocks zone in the middle. That's a great way to think about it. Now, the Fed doesn't want the opposite of inflation, which is deflation, meaning that if you hold on to your currency, it gets stronger because prices are falling in deflation. Because when this happens, just ask yourself, if you think your dollar will be stronger tomorrow than it is today, meaning prices will fall tomorrow, well, then you would tend to postpone your purchases. Oh, and the Fed hates that because consumer activity drives 2/3 of our economy. Now, this Fed funds rate that we've been discussing, this directly affects short-term rates. Consumer loans like home equity lines of credit, credit cards, CDs, and savings accounts, and it has a more loose connection with affecting long-term rates like 30 and 15-year mortgage rates. The Fed's full name is the Federal Open Market Committee, or the FOMC, and they have 8 annual scheduled meetings where they announce any plans for rate changes. And by the way, they can also announce emergency rate changes anytime between meetings, just like they did during COVID. Oh yes, those hotly anticipated Fed meetings. There's a party going on at Club Fed. Somehow, strangely, former Fed Chair Janet Yellen is chaperoning there, and she still looks like my grandma. If I ever find myself at a party at Club Fed, I'm going to have to leave to go home early to let the dog out, and I don't even have a dog. You can always look up the Fed's upcoming meetings over here. And the Fed has 12 members. They're transparent with their twofold goal. It's simple. They want maximum employment and price stability. That's what is known as their dual mandate. Most of the rate changes they make are 0.25% at a time, but they made some 0.75% increases during COVID. And Fed Chair Jerome Powell was nominated to the board by Obama in 2012 and then elevated to chairman under President Trump, sworn in 2018 and confirmed by the Senate. What happens is that the president nominates the Fed chair for a 4-year term, and then they're supposed to be independent from each other. The Fed and the president shouldn't try to influence each other, so presidents aren't supposed to make remarks about what they think the Fed should do. But when Trump was president, he basically told Powell, hey dude, chill with the rate increases. See, presidents want lower rates on their watch to stimulate the economy, and the long run average is a 4.6% federal funds rate. They're close to normal at the time of this video, and rates haven't changed at all for almost a year. The Fed funds rate was 19% in 1981. You heard that correctly. And another Fed term is that a rate hike. That means that they are raising rates. I wish they'd just say raise. Lowering rates is just known as lowering rates. And a Fed pivot, that is a term that means when the Fed changes direction. For example, going from raising rates to lowering them. Now let's talk more about where mortgage rates fit into this, because mortgages, they're probably the biggest chunks of debt that you'll ever have in your life. The 30-year mortgage rate, that's historically 1.5% to 2% above the federal funds rate. And mortgage rates are tremendously important to the housing market. Of course, it's your cost of money. The flex for real estate investors is that the tenant pays all of your interest with an income property, but higher rates still impede your profitability, your cash flow. And in recent years past, mortgage rates were lower than the seafloor bottom. Many locked in mortgages below 5% and below 4%, and then some even below 3%. And that's often why people still won't sell their homes today here years later, because they'd have to replace their low rate mortgage with a current one at a higher rate. And that's what's constricted the number of sales. When rates go back down, look for the housing market to break loose, all else equal. More people will be willing to both buy and sell, propelling affordability and probably faster home price appreciation. And studies show that when mortgage rates fall into the high fives, that's the key level that will substantially boost transactions. My favorite mortgage website is Freddie Mac, and favorite mobile app is Mortgage News Daily. Let's be real, Fed watching, it's not quite the spectator sport like the NFL or the NBA, but if you're so inclined, you sure can order pizza and watch the next rate announcement. The bottom line is that Fed decisions affect your cost of money, and if nothing else, remember that rates are high in a strong economy and low in a weak economy. And here's a surprise, when mortgage rates rise, what typically happens to home prices and why? It's not at all what you'd expect. You'll be surprised. You can watch that video next right here.